What do you write when you know you're probably going to die? When you're sitting in a muddy foxhole in the Philippines, listening to Japanese artillery fall closer with each salvo, and you realize this might be your last chance to say the things you've been too afraid or too proud to say? Do you tell your mother you're sorry for all the times you disappointed her? Do you confess to your father that you're terrified, that you cry at night when no one can see, that you're not the brave soldier he thinks you are? Do you finally tell the girl back home that you've loved her since the 8th grade, even though she's engaged to someone else now? And what happens to those letters, those raw confessions written in moments of absolute honesty, when somehow, against all odds, you survive? Do you send them anyway and reveal the vulnerable, broken person you were in your darkest hour? Or do you hide them away, bury them deep, pretend you never wrote words that exposed your soul? I'm 94 years old, and I still have those letters, 12 of them, written during the bloodiest month of my life in February 1945 on the island of Luzon in the Philippines. I never sent them. I couldn't. But maybe it's time someone read them. Time someone understood what we really felt during those terrible days beneath the bravado and the duty and the determination to do our jobs. Maybe it's time to finally send those letters, not to the people they were written for, most of whom are long gone, but to anyone who wants to understand what war really does to a young man's heart. My name is James Patrick Sullivan, and I was a private first class in the 37th Infantry Division, fighting in the brutal campaign to liberate Manila from Japanese occupation. I was 20 years old in February 1945, from a working-class Irish family in Boston, the oldest of 6 children. My father was a dock worker, my mother a seamstress who took in piecework to help make ends meet. I'd dropped out of high school at 16 to work at a factory, helping support the family, and I'd enlisted the day after Pearl Harbor was attacked, filled with rage and patriotic fervor and a young man's certainty that war would be an adventure. By February 1945, I'd been in the Pacific for 18 months, had fought at Bougainville in New Georgia, had seen enough death and suffering to strip away every illusion I'd ever had about war. I wasn't the boy who'd enlisted anymore. I was something else. Something harder and more fragile at the same time, held together by duty and fear, and the desperate need to survive long enough to go home. The battle for Manila began on February 3, 1945, when our division entered the northern outskirts of the city. We expected the Japanese to abandon Manila and retreat to the mountains like they'd done in other cities, but they didn't. General Yamashita had ordered the evacuation of the city, but the naval forces under Admiral Iwabuchi disobeyed and decided to defend Manila to the last man. What followed was a month of the most vicious urban combat of the Pacific War, a nightmare of house-to-house fighting that destroyed one of Asia's most beautiful cities and killed over 100,000 Filipino civilians caught in the crossfire. We fought for every street, every building, every room. The Japanese had fortified everything, turned schools and churches and hospitals into strong points, rigged entire blocks with explosives. They fought with suicidal determination, and they committed atrocities against Filipino civilians that I still can't talk about without feeling sick. I started writing my first unsent letter on February 5th, after 2 days of combat that left me shaken in ways I couldn't fully articulate. We'd been fighting to clear a neighborhood in the northern part of the city, and I'd seen things that broke something inside me. I won't describe what I saw, what the Japanese had done to Filipino families, because some images are too terrible to share. But that night, huddled in what remained of a bombed-out house, I pulled out a piece of paper and a pencil and started writing. Not to my parents, not yet, but to my younger brother Tommy, who was 16 and talking about enlisting as soon as he turned 17. Dear Tommy, I wrote, my hand shaking so badly the letters looked like a child's scrawl. I know you want to join up. Know you think you're missing out on something important by being too young. I'm writing to tell you that you're not missing anything except horror and death and the destruction of everything good in the world. Stay home, Tommy. Stay in school. Help Mom and Dad. Don't do what I did. Don't be in such a hurry to become a killer, because that's what this war turns you into, no matter how just the cause. I've killed men, Tommy. I've shot them and stabbed them and watched them die, and every single one of them is burned into my memory forever. Some of them were probably decent people before the war, probably had families and dreams just like us, But they wore the wrong uniform, and that made them targets. I did my duty, followed orders, fought for my country, but it's changed me in ways I'm only starting to understand. I have nightmares every night. I can't eat without feeling sick. I jump at every sudden sound. I don't recognize the person I've become. This isn't adventure, Tommy. This isn't glory. This is hell, and I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, much less on my little brother. So please, please stay home. The world needs people who haven't been broken by war, who can still see beauty and feel joy and build instead of destroy. Let that be you. Let me be the one who carries this burden so you don't have to. I never sent that letter. I folded it up and put it in the bottom of my pack beneath my spare socks and rations. When we moved out the next morning, I told myself I'd send it eventually, once I'd thought about it more, once I was sure I wanted Tommy to see me like that, weak and scared and broken. But I never did. I wrote 11 more letters over the following weeks, and I never sent any of them either. The second letter was to my father, written on February 8th after we'd fought our way across the Pasig River into the southern part of Manila, where the Japanese resistance was heaviest. My father was a hard man, never showed emotion, never said he loved us, though I know he did in his way. He'd raised us to be tough, to never complain, to always do our duty no matter the cost. He'd been proud when I enlisted, prouder still when I was promoted to PFC, wrote me letters filled with advice about being a good soldier and bringing honor to the Sullivan name. I'd always tried to live up to his expectations, always tried to be the son he wanted. But that night, sitting in a shell-cratered street with the fires of burning Manila lighting up the sky, I couldn't pretend anymore. Dear Dad, I wrote, I need to tell you something I've never been able to say to your face. I'm scared. I'm terrified every single day, every single hour, and I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. You always taught me to be brave, to never show weakness. And I've tried, Dad. I've really tried. But I'm not brave. I'm just good at hiding how scared I am. I see men die every day and I wonder when it'll be my turn. I hear bullets snap past my head and I want to run away, want to throw down my rifle and just run until I'm somewhere safe. The only thing that stops me is knowing it would shame you, shame the family, shame everyone who believes in me. So I stay, and I fight, and I pretend to be the brave soldier you think I am. But I wanted you to know the truth. Just once. I wanted you to know that your son is afraid, that he cries when no one's watching, that he's barely holding himself together. I wanted you to know that bravery isn't the absence of fear like you always said. It's being absolutely terrified and doing your duty anyway. And I'm so tired, Dad. So tired of being afraid, of seeing death, of wondering if I'll ever be normal again. I hope I make you proud, even knowing this. I hope you can still love your son even though he's not as strong as you wanted him to be. I cried while writing that letter, silent tears that I wiped away quickly in case any of the other men saw. Then I folded it carefully and put it with the first letter, in that secret place at the bottom of my pack where I kept the things I couldn't bear to look at, but couldn't throw away. The fighting in Manila grew worse as February progressed. The Japanese had concentrated their forces in the Intramuros, the old walled city, and in several massive concrete government buildings they'd turned into fortresses. We assaulted these positions day after day, taking horrific casualties, gaining ground measured in yards rather than miles. Artillery and airstrikes pounded the city, reducing beautiful Spanish colonial architecture to rubble. The civilian death toll was staggering. Tens of thousands killed in the crossfire or murdered deliberately by Japanese troops in their final orgy of violence. We found massacre sites that made grown men vomit, evidence of atrocities so terrible that our officers ordered us not to talk about them, worried that we'd start executing prisoners in revenge. On February 12th, my squad was ordered to assault a Japanese position in what had been a Catholic church. The Japanese had fortified it with sandbags and machine guns, had positioned snipers in the bell tower. We attacked at dawn and it turned into a bloodbath. My best friend, a kid from Chicago named Danny Kowalski, was shot through the throat by a sniper. He died in my arms, drowning in his own blood, trying to say something I couldn't understand. We took the church eventually, killed every Japanese soldier inside, but the cost was terrible. Of my 12-man squad, 5 were dead and 3 were wounded badly enough to be evacuated. I was untouched physically, but something broke inside me that day. That night, I wrote to Danny's mother, Mrs. Kowalski, a kind woman who'd sent Danny care packages that he always shared with the rest of us. "Dear Mrs. Kowalski," I wrote, and immediately had to stop because I was crying too hard to see the paper. I waited until I could control myself, then continued. "The Army will send you an official telegram saying that Danny was killed in action, that he died bravely in service of his country. That's all true, but it's not the whole truth, and you deserve to know what really happened to your son. Danny was the bravest man I ever knew, and also the kindest. He kept our whole squad's spirits up with his jokes and his optimism. He shared everything he had, even when he didn't have much to share. He talked about you all the time, Mrs. Kowalski, about how much he loved you and how he couldn't wait to get home and eat your pierogi again. He carried your photograph everywhere, kept it in his helmet, and he'd look at it before every battle. He died trying to save another soldier who'd been hit, ran into enemy fire to drag him to safety. A sniper shot him, and it was quick, Mrs. Kowalski. He didn't suffer long. I held him while he died, and I think he was trying to say something about you, trying to send you a message. I wish I knew what it was. I wish I could give you that last gift from your son. All I can tell you is that he was brave and good, and that I loved him like a brother. The world is poorer without Danny Kowalski in it, and I'm so sorry I couldn't save him. I'm so sorry I'm the one writing this letter instead of him writing to his own mother. I promise you that I'll never forget him, that I'll carry his memory with me for the rest of my life. I promise that his death meant something, that we won the battle and saved other lives. I know that's cold comfort, but it's all I have to offer. Your son was a hero and he died a hero, and I'm honored that I got to know him. I couldn't send that letter either. The Army had its own way of notifying families, and my letter would just confuse things, would raise questions the Army wouldn't want answered. So I folded it and added it to my growing collection of unsent confessions. By mid-February, Manila was a vision of hell. The city burned constantly, smoke and ash filling the air until you could barely breathe. Artillery fire was constant, ours and theirs, and the sound of explosions never stopped. The stench was overwhelming, a combination of rotting bodies, burning buildings, cordite, and death that seeped into your clothes and skin and hair until you couldn't smell anything else. We fought in the ruins, clambering over rubble, clearing buildings room by room, never knowing if the next door you kicked in would reveal enemies waiting to kill you. The stress was unbearable, the casualty rate unsustainable. Men broke down mentally, had to be evacuated with what they called combat fatigue. Others became reckless, stopped caring whether they lived or died. I fell somewhere in between, functioning but damaged, doing my job while feeling like I was watching myself from a distance. On February 16th, I wrote to my mother. Of all the letters, this was the hardest because my mother was the person who loved me most in the world, who'd sacrificed so much to raise us, who believed I was something special. I couldn't bear the thought of her knowing what I'd become, what the war had done to her son. But I needed to tell her, needed to confess, needed her to understand even if I never actually sent the words. "Dear Mom," I wrote, "I don't know how to tell you this, don't know if I should, but I need you to hear it even if I never work up the courage to actually send this letter. I'm not the son you raised anymore. The boy who left Boston in 1942, who kissed you goodbye at the train station and promised to write every week and come home safe, that boy is gone. He died somewhere in the jungles of the Solomon Islands, or maybe in the ruins of Manila. I'm not sure exactly when. What's left is someone else, someone you wouldn't recognize, someone I don't recognize when I look in a mirror. I've done terrible things, Mom. I've killed men at close range, seen their faces as they died. I've watched civilians suffer and die, and not been able to help them. I've become hard and cold and capable of violence that would horrify you. The gentle boy you raised, who hated to see animals hurt, who cried at sad movies, that boy couldn't exist here. He would have died immediately, so I became someone else, someone who could survive in hell. And I don't know if I can ever go back to being who I was. I don't know if that boy still exists anywhere inside this shell I've become. I want to come home, Mom. I dream about it every night. But I'm scared of what you'll see when you look at me. Scared that you'll see the violence and the damage and the guilt. I'm scared you won't be able to love this person I've become. But I need you to know that even though I've changed, even though I've done things that would break your heart, I'm still your son. Part of me is still that little boy you tucked into bed and sang to and told stories about saints and angels. That part is buried deep, protected behind walls I built to survive, but it's still there. I hold on to it like a lifeline, proof that I was human once and maybe can be human again. I love you, Mom. I'm sorry for what I've become. I'm sorry I couldn't stay the son you wanted me to be. But I'm trying to survive, and survival has required me to become someone else. I hope you can forgive me for that. I hope when I finally do come home, if I come home, you can help me find my way back to being your son again. I sobbed while writing that letter, huge wrenching sobs that shook my whole body. Another soldier, a corporal I barely knew, saw me and came over, put his hand on my shoulder. "It's okay, kid. We all break down sometimes. This place would make anyone crack." I nodded, unable to speak, and he sat with me until I'd cried myself out. Then I folded the letter, added it to the others, and prepared for the next day's assault. The battle for the Intramuros began on February 23rd. The ancient walled city was the Japanese's last major stronghold in Manila, and they'd turned it into a fortress. The walls were 20 feet thick in places, built to withstand cannon fire from the age of sailing ships. Inside, the Japanese had fortified every building, turned churches and monasteries and government buildings into bunkers. We bombarded the Intramuros for days with artillery and airstrikes trying to soften the defenses, but the massive stone walls absorbed punishment that would have destroyed modern structures. Finally, we assaulted, blasting holes in the walls with artillery at point-blank range, then pouring through into the maze of streets and buildings beyond. The fighting inside the Intramuros was the worst I experienced in the entire war. Every building was a fortress, every window a potential firing position. The Japanese fought from the rubble, using the destruction we'd created as cover and concealment. They had snipers in every surviving bell tower and rooftop. They'd rigged buildings with explosives, waited until we'd occupied them, then detonated them, killing everyone inside. The civilian population trapped inside the Intramuros suffered terribly, caught between two armies, with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. We found them in cellars and crypts, starving and terrified, and we tried to evacuate them to safety, but many didn't make it. On February 25th, we were fighting to clear a monastery that the Japanese had fortified. The building was ancient, beautiful Spanish colonial architecture covered in religious artwork that was being destroyed in the fighting. We were moving through the cloisters, clearing rooms, when we came upon a chapel where Filipino civilians had taken shelter. There were maybe 30 people, mostly women and children, and they were all dead. The Japanese had massacred them, probably hours before we arrived. The scene was so horrific I can't describe it, won't describe it, will take the details to my grave. But that image, those bodies, haunts me still. I see them when I close my eyes. I see them in my nightmares. They represent everything evil and senseless about war. The destruction of innocence, the death of hope. That night I wrote a letter to God. I'm not sure why. I'd never been particularly religious, had stopped believing in much of anything after what I'd seen. But I needed to address the questions that were eating me alive. Needed to rage at someone or something for the horror I'd witnessed. "Dear God," I wrote, my hand pressing so hard the pencil tore through the paper. "I don't know if you exist. Don't know if you're listening, but I need to ask you some questions. Where were you today when those people died? Where were you when they prayed to you for salvation that never came? Where have you been during this entire war while millions have suffered and died? How can you allow this? How can a just and loving God permit the things I've seen, the atrocities committed, the innocents destroyed? Either you don't exist or you don't care, or you're not as powerful as we were taught to believe. I want to believe in you. Want to believe there's some higher purpose to all this suffering, some divine plan that makes sense of the senseless. But I can't see it. All I see is evil triumphant, good people dying, and silence from heaven. So I'm asking you, if you're real, if you're listening, Show me something. Give me some sign that this all means something, that there's justice waiting, that the people who died today and the millions who've died before them didn't just cease to exist, but went somewhere better. Because if this is all there is, if there's nothing beyond this horror, then what's the point? Why should I keep fighting? Why should I try to survive? Why shouldn't I just give up and let death take me like it's taken so many others? I need a reason to keep going, God. I need hope, and I don't know where to find it anymore. I didn't expect an answer, and I didn't get one, at least not in any obvious way. But writing the letter helped somehow, gave voice to the questions that tormented me, acknowledged the crisis of faith I was experiencing. I folded it and put it with the others, my collection of confessions and questions and fears that no one would ever read. The fighting in Manila continued through the end of February. We cleared the Intramuros building by building, room by room, floor by floor. The Japanese fought to the death, refusing to surrender, making us kill them all. By the time the battle ended on March 3rd, over 16,000 Japanese soldiers were dead, along with over 100,000 Filipino civilians. Our division suffered heavy casualties too, with hundreds killed and thousands wounded. Manila, the Pearl of the Orient, was destroyed, reduced to a burning ruin second only to Warsaw in the extent of its devastation. We'd won the battle, liberated the city, but it felt like a hollow victory given what the victory had cost. During those final days of fighting, I wrote 5 more letters, one to my younger sister Mary, telling her to stay sweet and innocent, to never let the world make her hard like it had made me. One to my high school English teacher, Mr. Sacre Patterson, thanking him for believing in me when no one else did and apologizing for not living up to the potential he saw in me. One to myself, a strange confession about who I'd been and who I'd become, and whether those two people could ever be reconciled. One to the Japanese soldier I'd killed in hand-to-hand combat in a room in the Intramuros, apologizing for taking his life and wondering who he'd been before the war made us enemies. And one last letter to Sarah McKenna, the girl from my neighborhood I'd loved since we were kids who'd gotten engaged to a 4F guy who'd stayed home while I was fighting overseas. The letter to Sarah was the most painful to write because it required me to admit feelings I'd hidden for years, to confess a love that was hopeless and probably always had been. Sarah had never seen me as anything but a friend, had never given me any indication that she felt the same way I did, but I'd loved her anyway, had carried her memory through 18 months of hell, had held on to the fantasy that maybe when I got home, things would be different. When I'd heard she was engaged, something broke inside me. Some last reservoir of hope drained away. But I needed to tell her anyway, needed to get the words out even if she never read them. Dear Sarah, I wrote, sitting in the ruins of a church at midnight, exhausted beyond measure but unable to sleep. I need to tell you something I should have said years ago when we were kids and everything seemed possible. I love you. I've loved you since the 8th grade, since the day you defended me from the bigger boys who were picking on me, since you smiled at me like I was worth defending. I've loved you through high school, through all those years when you dated other guys and I pretended to be happy for you. I loved you when I enlisted and when I shipped out and through every day of this war. Loving you kept me alive, Sarah. When things were at their worst, when I wanted to give up and let the war take me, I'd think about you. I'd remember your laugh and your smile and the way you'd toss your hair when you were annoyed. I'd imagine coming home and finally working up the courage to tell you how I felt. Imagine you may be feeling the same way. Imagine building a life together. That fantasy got me through battles I shouldn't have survived, gave me a reason to keep fighting when I'd lost every other reason. I know you're engaged now. Know you're building a life with someone else. I know my timing is terrible and my confession is selfish and probably unwelcome. But I needed to tell you anyway. Needed you to know that you've been loved deeply and truly by someone who's seen the worst humanity has to offer and still believes you represent the best. You were my hope during the hopeless times, my light in the darkness. And even though you'll never be mine, even though you'll marry someone else and build a life I'm not part of, I'll always be grateful that you existed in my world, that I got to know you and love you even if you never knew I felt that way. You deserve every happiness, Sarah. You deserve a good man who can give you the life you want, who hasn't been broken by war, who can love you the way you deserve. I hope your fiancé knows how lucky he is. I hope he treasures you the way I would have. Be happy, Sarah. That's all I want for you. Be gloriously, wonderfully happy. And maybe sometimes, when you're old and looking back on your life, spare a thought for Jimmy Sullivan from down the street, who loved you with everything he had and never found the courage to say so until it was too late. I cried while writing that letter, mourned the life I'd never have, the love that would never be returned. Then I folded it carefully and added it to the others. 11 letters now, confessions and apologies and fears and loves that would never be shared with their intended recipients. The 12th and final letter I wrote on March 4, 1945, the day after Manila was declared secure. We were being pulled off the line for rest and refit, and I was sitting on the steps of a ruined building, looking at the devastated city and trying to process what I'd experienced. I'd survived when so many others hadn't. Danny Kowalski was dead, along with 7 other men from my squad. Thousands of Filipino civilians were dead. The city was destroyed. And I was alive, damaged but intact, with no explanation for why I'd been spared. That last letter was addressed to no one in particular, or maybe to everyone, or maybe just to the universe itself. To whoever reads this, I wrote, if anyone ever reads this, if these letters are ever found, I want you to know what war really is. Not the glory and heroism that gets written about in newspapers and history books, but the truth. War is young men killing each other for reasons old men decided. War is watching your friends die and being powerless to save them. War is seeing civilians suffer and knowing you can't protect them. War is becoming someone you don't recognize, someone capable of violence you never imagined you could commit. War is carrying guilt and grief and trauma that never fully heals, that becomes part of who you are forever. War is love letters never sent, and words never spoken, and dreams never realized. War is waste, the destruction of everything good and beautiful and innocent. And the worst part is that sometimes war is necessary, that evil exists in the world that must be fought, that standing by and doing nothing would be even worse than the horror of fighting. So we fight, and we kill, and we watch our friends die, and we carry the weight of it forever. We do it because someone has to, because freedom isn't free and democracy must be defended and tyranny must be opposed. But don't ever mistake that necessity for glory. Don't ever romanticize what we did or what we experienced. War is hell, and everyone who lives through it is scarred by it, changed in ways that can never be undone. Remember that. Honor it, but never glorify it. And do everything in your power to make sure future generations never have to experience what we experienced. That's the only way to give meaning to the suffering, the only way to honor the dead. Build a world that doesn't need wars, that solves conflicts without violence, that values every human life as precious and irreplaceable. That's the world we were fighting for, even if we knew we'd never live to see it. That's the dream worth dying for. Don't let us down. I finished that letter as the sun was setting over ruined Manila, painting the destroyed city in shades of orange and red that looked like the fires that had consumed it. Then I folded it carefully and added it to the others, 12 letters in all. My heart laid bare in words I'd never have the courage to speak aloud. I survived the war. I fought through the rest of the Philippines campaign, was part of the occupation of Japan after the surrender, and finally came home in early 1946. I'd been gone for 4 years, and Boston seemed like a foreign country. Everything was the same but different, or maybe I was the one who was different and everything else had stayed the same. I couldn't relate to people who hadn't been to war, couldn't explain what I'd experienced in ways they'd understand. The nightmares I'd developed in Manila persisted, along with what they now call PTSD but didn't have a name for back then. I jumped at loud noises, had trouble sleeping, felt disconnected from the world around me. I never sent those 12 letters. I kept them hidden in a box in the back of my closet, couldn't bring myself to share them or throw them away. Tommy never enlisted, whether because of something I said in person or just because the war ended before he turned 17. My father and I never had the conversation I'd written about in that unsent letter, never acknowledged my fear or his expectations, just fell back into our old patterns of distant affection. I saw Mrs. Kowalski at Danny's memorial service, held her while she cried, but I never told her what I'd written about her son's death. I went to church with my mother and pretended to believe, never shared the crisis of faith I'd written about in my letter to God. And Sarah married her fiancé in the summer of 1946, and I went to the wedding and smiled and congratulated them, and never told her what she'd meant to me during those dark days in Manila. I built a life despite the damage. I went back to school on the GI Bill, became a teacher like Mr. Patterson. I met a wonderful woman named Margaret, who was patient with my nightmares and my silences, who loved me despite the broken places. We married and had 3 children and 8 grandchildren and built a good life together. But those 12 letters were always there, hidden in a box, a reminder of who I'd been in the worst moment of my life, of truths I'd been too afraid to share. Margaret found the letters after she died 3 years ago. I'd never told her about them, never shared that part of my war experience. My daughter found them while going through Margaret's things and brought them to me, asked what they were. I told her, and she read them, and she cried. Then she asked why I'd never sent them, why I'd hidden these truths from the people who loved me. I didn't have a good answer. Pride, maybe. Fear of seeming weak. Shame at having broken down so completely. Or maybe just the belief that those feelings belonged to a different person, a scared 20-year-old kid trapped in hell, and that person wasn't who I'd become. But my daughter convinced me that the letters had value, that they showed a truth about war that needed to be shared. She convinced me that hiding them was a disservice to the other men who'd fought beside me, who'd felt the same things but never written them down, who'd died with their fears and confessions unspoken. She convinced me that maybe, just maybe, sharing these letters could help people understand what war really costs, not in strategic terms or casualty statistics, but in human terms, in broken hearts and lost innocence and dreams deferred. So I'm sharing them now, 79 years after I wrote them. The people they were addressed to are mostly gone. Tommy died in 1998, my father in 1967, my mother in 1981. Sarah passed away last year, lived a long and happy life with her husband. Mrs. Kowalski died in the 1950s, never really recovering from the loss of her son. The letters can't reach their intended recipients anymore, but maybe they can reach someone else, someone who needs to understand what their grandfather or great-grandfather went through, what he felt but couldn't say, what truths he carried silently for decades. These 12 letters are my confession, my attempt to bridge the gap between the person I was in February 1945 and the person I became afterward. They're proof that soldiers aren't heroes devoid of fear and doubt, but human beings pushed to their absolute limits, breaking and somehow finding the strength to keep going. They're evidence that war damages everyone it touches, that the survivors carry wounds that never fully heal, that victory comes at a price we're still paying decades later. I'm 94 years old now, one of the last living veterans of the Manila campaign. Most of the men who fought beside me are gone, their stories lost, their truths buried with them. I don't want these letters to be buried too. I want people to read them and understand, to see beyond the sanitized version of war we present to the world, and glimpse the raw reality underneath. War is necessary sometimes. Evil must be fought, and I'm proud of what we accomplished. But pride doesn't erase the cost, doesn't heal the wounds, doesn't bring back the dead or restore the innocence we lost. These letters are a testament to that cost, a reminder of what we sacrificed and what we became in the service of our country. If you've read this far, thank you. Thank you for caring enough to listen to an old man's story, to read words written in fear and pain and desperate honesty. These letters never reach their intended recipients, but maybe they've reached you, and maybe that's enough. Maybe you'll think twice before glorifying war, before sending young men to fight without understanding what you're asking of them. Maybe you'll reach out to the veterans in your own life, give them permission to share their truths, let them know that their fears and doubts and damage don't diminish their service but prove their humanity. Maybe you'll work to build the world we dreamed of while huddled in foxholes in Manila, a world that solves conflicts without violence, that values peace over victory, that never again asks young men to become killers in service of a cause. That's my hope in sharing these letters finally, after keeping them hidden for most of my life. Not for attention or sympathy, but for understanding, for connection, for the possibility that our suffering might prevent future suffering. We wrote letters we never sent because we were afraid of being seen as weak, afraid of disappointing the people who believed in us, afraid of revealing how broken we really were. But maybe that fear was wrong. Maybe sharing our truth, however painful and raw, is the most courageous thing we can do. Maybe the real betrayal would be staying silent, taking these truths to our graves, letting another generation go to war without understanding what awaits them. So here they are, 12 letters never sent, finally delivered 79 years late. Read them, remember them, honor the truths they contain, and do better than we did. Build a better world. That's all we ever wanted. That's the only thing that makes the cost worthwhile. If this story moved you, if these letters helped you understand the human cost of war, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to hear more stories from World War II veterans. Share your thoughts in the comments below. These truths need to be told while those of us who lived them are still here to tell them. Help us break the silence. Help us share the reality beneath the glory. Thank you for reading these letters that were never sent. Thank you for finally receiving them, even if you're not who they were written for. Thank you for remembering.